Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. And this is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Go Iowa Awesome and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined as always by publisher Adam Jacoby and managing editor Ross Binder here on the 72nd episode of HawkCast. Before we get started, make sure wherever you are listening, you hit that subscribe button. If you're on YouTube especially, drop a comment, drop a like. Let us know what you're thinking about all things Hawkeye sports. If you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you might be listening but not subscribed. So hit that subscribe button. If you're a regular listener, please leave that rate and review. It helps us out and it does make us very happy. So fresh off some Iowa baseball news. Of course, we don't talk much baseball here on HawkCast, but Ross Binder, as well as Eric, what's Eric's last name? Ruttenberg?
Yeah.
Ruttenberg, yeah. Well, I never talked to that guy in my life, but he helps us with baseball stuff. So Eric and Ross on the baseball beat here for us at iowa.rivals.com. So Ross, the Hawks lose 4-2 in a 10th inning drama to Illinois in the Big Ten tournament, ends their season. Everything I'm seeing on Twitter has been quite interesting. I'll leave it to you to explain what happened there and just the oddity. And it's like invalid fair catch all over again by the sounds of it.
Yeah, pretty much. It is, I would say, the most ludicrous call involving an Iowa player since that Cooper DeJean play back in the fall. So yeah, Iowa lost to Illinois today 4-2. It was the second game of the Big Ten tournament for them. It's a double elimination tournament. They lost yesterday in extra innings to Michigan, and then they lost to Illinois today, also in extra innings. So extra baseball, no wins, and that does end their season, which we can talk a little bit about that in a minute. But yeah, this game, so they went into the extras tied 2-2, gave up 2 to Illinois in the top of the 10th. So Illinois is up 4-2. Iowa was the home team batting in the bottom of the inning. Got some runners on base, and there was a very controversial play where the Iowa runner was running into second base, and the Illinois player wasn't impeded at all, was throwing to first base, and I believe got the out. But in the mean, they also called an interference on the Iowa runner, and so he was out, and that ended the game, I believe. And it was a very ridiculous call because he was nowhere near the Illinois player on the slide into the base and didn't impact the play whatsoever. Kyle Huseman, an Iowa media member, was covering the game, and he got some quotes from the Big Ten officials after the game and posted them on Twitter. And basically, they said that the Iowa player, the interference call was made because he didn't run in a direct, or he didn't slide in a direct line between the bases, between first and second base. His entire body was not in a straight line between the bases, which is just a really absurd call. I mean, it's something that if that's the way you're going to enforce that, it seems like you could literally call that on every single slide into second base. Like it's a truly bizarre call to make in that circumstance. And the timing that it essentially ended the game, ended Iowa's comeback bid in the bottom of the 10th. Really, the circumstances really make it even more unfortunate. Like this was not kind of a weird call in the bottom of the second inning or something. Like this was one of the biggest plays of the game, or calls of the game, certainly. And yeah, so that's how the game ended for Iowa. That's how the season ended, and it's a tough way to go out.
The bases were loaded too. Correct me if I'm wrong there. I thought it was bases loaded with one out.
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
And so it was bases loaded, nobody out. And so they called Huckstorf out for interference. And then I guess Iowa had a strikeout after that.
Okay. Yeah.
According to the box scores. But that was still, bases loaded, nobody out, and down by 2 in the bottom of the 10th inning. And what was really striking to me is that the play was reviewed. They went to video review. They stopped the game for 5 minutes so the umpires could play I almost said CSI. And that was, they confirmed the call. And if you look, and we'll put a link to the play in question in all of our descriptions and all that, so people who hadn't seen it, you can see it for yourself. You tell us we're wrong, right? Like, go watch that play. Tell us we're exaggerating anything about this, because it really does feel like the invalid fair catch signal again. It feels like the phantom offsides call on Chad Greenway again. It's that level of just a blown call. And if you're going to stop the game for 5 minutes, you're going to go under the hood. You're going to, watch replay of this, and that's still the conclusion that you come to, that runner deserved to be called out for that slide, then, like Ross said, you're going to have to enforce that on a majority of the slides into second, and it's completely unfair. Well, let's just say that it's unfair to Huckstorf. It's an unfair call to make, and you would hope that, given the opportunity to make a statement, that the referees could say, yeah, you know what, we kind of biffed that one. That, I think, would restore a little bit more credibility to the Big Ten and its officials than doubling down on this not a straight line thing. Because, I mean, guys, I think we've all watched at least one baseball game in our lifetimes. We know that nobody is following these base paths in an exact straight line. It's in fact, you're taught not to. And yeah, there's nothing about that slide that indicated any attempt to interfere with the play in the throw to first, or anything else that the fielder. I don't think, if there were no interference call, the fielder would not have made an appeal to the umpires. It was as stock standard a play as you're ever going to see. And so, yeah, that was really deeply disappointing. And you would hope that, given the opportunity, one, for video replay, and then two, to actually put a statement together, that there might be some adult in the room for the Big Ten and its officials, but you don't see it here. And I hope that there's some way, obviously, the outcome of the game is what it is. And Iowa's season is over, and kind of deserves to be over. But you would hope that there's some way to say, hey, look, that's not the way that should be called. Even if it's just a forward-looking thing for 2024-25 for the, for next season. I guess it would just be 25.
Yeah.
Even if it's just that would be better than where this situation is right now, because that was a rough call in a rough moment. And again, because it was interference, the runner on third can't score on the play, right? Because they're not allowed to advance. So that kept a run off the board and put Iowa in this position where all of a sudden it's 2 outs and they're still down by 2. And yeah, 1 strikeout swinging later and their season's over. Like that, any team, any athletes deserve better than that when their season's on the line, period.
So there are two things that I think of when we're relating it to the invalid catch signal, right? These were both bad officiating jobs, but for two different reasons. So when we look back at the invalid fair catch call, it was going back and finding something that wasn't there the first time, right? It's too much involvement. And in this baseball example, well, again, too much involvement, but this is going to replay to see if it's the right call, doubling down and going on ego rather than going on doing the correct job. Like, oh, that I made the wrong call. That's my bad. He's safe, or sorry, he's out, but no interference. And let's get back to it. That's my bad. And that's the mentality that should be, because what's the point of replay if you're going to just double down? What's the freaking point? And what's the point of going back to replay to see if he stepped out of bounds when he was just pointing at the ball and gets called for something else. Ross, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it is ridiculous. I mean, if you're just gonna reinforce the calls you already made, then just give us those 5 minutes back so we can move on and do something else. Like we don't need to spend that much time if the outcome is just gonna be is already predetermined that, well, I made this call to start with, I'm not gonna change. So that's that.
I've been on the video replay is bad for sports bandwagon for years and years, and I've subjected both of you to it many times. But this is just another one of those situations where they just stopped the game for 5 minutes so the referees could feel really important, do their little admin, and the outcome did not improve. And just like the invalid fair catch signal, the outcome did not improve. Everybody saw that return. Everybody on Minnesota's team was trying to bring down Cooper DeJean. Like, none of them were like, we were tricked. We were giving up on the play because he was doing this. Like, so when these bad reviews, one, stop the game cold, so everybody's just sort of sitting on their butts, and two, don't improve the outcome, don't improve the call. Why are we doing this? Especially in this TV era, where all of these nickel and dime cuts to the actual gameplay keep eroding into what fans show up for and tune in for. And yet we let referees just do all this needless admin. And for some reason, all of that is sacrosanct. And we can't say 1 minute time limit on video review. We can't say, we can't simplify rules that make these things easier to call for them. Because I really don't think referees are in position to succeed. And I don't want to go too far down that tangent. But this is just not a sustainable solution. I don't think video replay is better for the sport in its current situation. I don't think it's better for baseball. I don't think it's better for pretty much any sport outside of tennis at this point. And until somebody figures out a way to streamline it and make it more accurate, and that includes making the umpires make some correct calls in situations like this, then we're just going to bounce from one frustration to the next. And that's really too bad. And again, it's a disservice to the players, regardless of which team they're playing for, regardless of which sport. They deserve better, especially when their season is on the line.
Adam, do you mean to tell me you don't go to games to watch Angel Hernandez and Ed Hightower do their thing?
I personally, I wanted the men's beat so I could watch Courtney Green. So
yeah, you're lucky that you're a little too young for TV Teddy, because he had some absolute bangers over the years. Bangers, as in you want to bang your head against the desk.
So again, what I've been told, what I've seen on Twitter is this baseball season was just kind of weird as well. Very high expectations, and obviously they didn't come to fruition.
Yeah, they came into the season a lot of buzz, a lot of hype. They were ranked preseason top 25, might have been top 20. I don't recall the exact ranking they had, but there was a lot of good vibes for this Iowa team. They had a lot of talent returning. Definitely one of the favorites, if not the favorite, to win the Big Ten. Definitely make the NCAA tournament. Even a little dark horse if everything goes right. Could they make the Omaha, the College World Series? Which would be extremely heady territory for any Big Ten team, and certainly Iowa. And yeah, that did not come close to fruition. They went 31-23 after these two losses this week. Did not middle of the pack in the Big Ten. I believe they finished fifth or tied for fourth. Yeah, and then they're not going to make the NCAA tournament at all. Their only hope was to win the Big Ten tournament this week and get the automatic bid. They're not in contention for an at-large. Their RPI was 95 before entering this week, and that's way too low for any sort of at-large consideration. In terms of what went wrong, it seemed like it was a little bit of everything, kind of at different times, and there was just a real lack of consistency. They had a couple great pitchers. Brody Brecht is going to be I would be shocked if he wasn't a first round pick in the MLB draft, which I believe is next month in June. He's got great stuff, just tremendous power. The control sometimes is a little off, but with the raw stuff he has, definitely a major league team is gonna be very excited to take him and see what they can mold him into. And he was generally very good this year for Iowa. He led the Big Ten with, I believe, 118 strikeouts in the regular season. Led the team in ERA. Had a couple of games where it wasn't great, but their struggles were not down to him. Cade Obermuller, another pitcher, he was really good. Posted some really strong numbers, but they didn't have a lot of depth in the starting pitching staff outside of those two. The bullpen gave up just a mess of leads, especially early in the season. Iowa went into the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th innings with leads on multiple occasions and could not hold them. Gacked them up. And then the lineup was not real consistent either, especially later in games. Often, like, they were pretty good at scoring runs early, and I guess pitchers adjusted, and they didn't adjust to the pitchers, and they struggled to score late in games, struggled to often just post enough runs. So tough season. I mean, this was definitely a year where pretty big things were expected for Iowa baseball. Rick Heller's done some great things in that job since he's been here, taking them to 3 NCAA tournaments, I believe. And there's definitely hope this could, be his best team yet. And they did not come close to that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't want to put it all on the bullpen because, Ross, like you said, there's a lot of things that went wrong, and it wasn't always the same thing over the course of the season. Brecht and Obermuller had pretty solid seasons. Brecht in particular, I think, solidified his case as a future first-round pick. But Marcus Morgan was sort of the third leg of that stool for the starting pitchers, and he had a rough year. Still good strikeout numbers, but his ERA was something like 7.5. And really gave up a lot of home runs. And then the bullpen, like you said, just blown lead after blown lead. So some stats here. There are 15 pitchers in Iowa's bullpen, and we're going to count that as anybody who made more relief starts than starts. And so of those 15, the middle of the pack in terms of ERA, Brant Hogue, 13 appearances, 11 1/3 innings, 794, which means there were 7 pitchers in Iowa's bullpen, and they weren't just like 1 inning, 2 inning guys either. There were 7 guys with ERAs of 8.31 or more. That is brutal, and that's a great way to see your season submarine. And by some act of mercy, they don't have blown saves listed at the very least in Iowa's team stats, but it might be double digits, guys. Like it was that rough, and it really is a shame because there are a lot of guys on this team. Like Sam Peterson was a ton of fun to watch this year. Brecht, his talent is self-evident. Raider Tello, a ton of fun to watch this year, and so. We know that Iowa baseball is better than this and has been, especially under Rick Heller over the last few seasons. And so that's the reason that these expectations were high, because they had really risen to them in years past. And they were higher than normal this year. I think we saw some projections at the beginning of the season that Iowa might even host, be a seeded team in the NCAA tournament. And I can't remember the last time that ever happened in Iowa City. Might be even before you were born, Eliot. Rarefied air, to be sure. But you really did want to see something better than what this season turned into. So between that and between the sort of, I don't want to call it fumbling, but the uncertainty that sort of surrounded the renovation funding for Dwayne Banks Field, which is in bad need of, a real class up. Especially considering what the rest of the Big Ten has to work with. Yeah, this was a little bit of a dispiriting season for Iowa baseball. So you hope it's a blip and not something to worry about a little bit more. But yeah, they've got a few things to figure out, especially in that bullpen, and especially with the sort of middling control that even the starters had this year. A lot to figure out.
So, on to the sport that Hawkeye fans will be watching for the remainder of the summer, the WNBA. Caitlin Clark having a rough start to her career thus far. Not so much Caitlin to a degree as much as Christie Sides. And to that, I'm going to head over to Adam, who is our beat writer for Iowa women's basketball.
Yeah, so the Indiana Fever are 0-5, and that is a bit of a rough welcome to the league, especially for Caitlin Clark, and especially, having come off of consecutive national championship appearances with the Hawkeyes. And so, we've had some readers be like, is the fun done? Is the feeling over? And
Adam, didn't Iowa lost 5 games total last year, right?
right. So, I mean, you can look at it like the Fever have hit their quota already. Like, Caitlin, as long as, Caitlin and crew go undefeated from here, everything's fine. They are not going to go undefeated from here. But it does sort of bear noting that through this, Caitlin Clark has had a pretty decent start to her season. She is 15th in the league at 17.8 points per game. And I add to that 4.6 rebounds, 5.8 assists. The troubling stat is 5.8 turnovers. And that leads the WNBA by a pretty significant margin. Next is Skylar Diggins-Smith at 4.6. So that is about the difference between Diggins-Smith and about the next 10 players combined. So it's at the very least, it's better than the first 3 games where Clark averaged 7 turnovers per game. So we're already seeing that come down. But that was something that Iowa was able to live with in Clark's game because of her tremendous production. And she is, producing well, but not at the level where you're like, we'll live with 6 turnovers a game. And, 0-5 to show for it is, sort of self-explanatory. So there's a lot to, a lot of improvement and a lot of adjustment yet for Caitlin Clark. But Eliot, like you said, Christie Sides is probably having a worse start to her season. And let's throw in Eliot Boston too. Both of them having worse starts to their season than Caitlin Clark is having to hers. Christie Sides is a name that most Iowa fans had never heard of before this season, and there's a little bit of a reason for that. She doesn't always look like she's in control of the game. There was one sequence in particular at the end of last night's game. I guess people are going to be listening to this on Thursday. At the end of Wednesday night's game, I'd say there was about a minute left off the top of my head, and the Fever are down by 4. And Clark is in transition, works her way open for a little bit of a shot. And Whitcomb, Whitcomb had pretty decent day on defense. She's a guard for the Seattle Storm. Goes flying past, no call or anything like that. And Clark's shot goes about 5 feet short of the hoop. No call. While Whitcomb is flying by with her arm up. So either Caitlin Clark just randomly had one of the 3 worst shot attempts of her life, or there was an uncalled shooting foul that Clark was begging the officials for, which takes a little bit of gumption after, the last time she got teed up for telling them to call an effing foul. Shout out to Reagan for already having those shirts ready. But while Clark is begging for a very, very important call in a very, very important moment, the camera and shout out to whoever was filming the Fever game that was telecast here in Des Moines, but they cut to Sides and she's just standing there, arms crossed, just looking up at the video board in the middle of the arena. Never acknowledges the fact that her star player is saying, hey, I got fouled. And then there's pretty questionable call that actually ended that play too, as I recall, and just nothing from her. And look, am I asking for a little bit of a performance? Yeah, I am. Because people need to see that leadership. People need to see that investment from the coach in their player. That confidence that, Caitlin is, kind of has a point and is not being left out to dry. So between some really strange rotations, at the very least, we have seen Sides sort of get away from those um, Clark, Boston, and Katie Lou Samuelson lineups, because that lineup cannot run the way that Clark wants them to run. So kudos for that, but it took a little while to get there. And it just seems like every time you look up, there's a coaching decision where you're like, wait, really? Really? And yeah, the Fever do not have the talent to hang with most of these teams. And they're 0-5 and probably don't deserve to be anything better than 2-3, even if they had a great coach. Because at the end of the day, there's so much talent in that league and so much talent that is not Caitlin Clark on that roster in Indianapolis. But you do want to see a coach putting them in position to succeed or fail on their own terms. And when you see Caitlin Clark just sort of sitting at the scorer's table from about 5 minutes left to 3.5 minutes left because Sides won't call a timeout to get her star shooter in the game, and during that time the Storm retake the lead and control of the game, you kind of got to wonder if she's in a little bit over her head. And again, you can't put the record all on the head coach, but you can sort of see that she's not really making a positive contribution. And I think Iowa fans were especially, I don't want to say spoiled, but something awfully close by Bluter, Jensen, Fitzgerald, Davis, Harmon, Stamp, everybody involved in that program who knows a thing or two about putting together a roster that accentuates its players' strengths. Listen, I'm sorry, Coach Sides, but you're on an accelerated timeline with Caitlin Clark in the building. You got to figure something out. And it's tough to see this sort of a start for somebody who's such an engine for success for the league.
Yeah.
Went on about 17 different tangents there.
Do we? I didn't mention this before the pod, but a tweet just came up on my feed about the bitterness with which some of the people in the WNBA have reacted to Caitlin. And I see the look on your face here, Adam. Do we want to hit on this? Because I mean, what I'll say here is we have heard folks in and around the WNBA clamoring for people to pay attention to the WNBA. And now they have a reason to. And now they're beating the crap out of her in these games. Now they're not giving her advantageous calls. Now they're saying, oh, but other people were good before her. Well, people are watching now. Why can't we celebrate that? Why can't we be excited about that? This is hypocrisy and narcissism and ego. And just to put it plainly, I think it's a bunch of bullshit. Go ahead, Adam.
There is a significant amount of gatekeeping and purity testing that is involved with that. And I get the sort of lingering bitterness when you've covered a sport that's as fun as the WNBA. And I've been a W fan for years and years. And I enjoyed, I especially enjoy the fact it's a little harder to enjoy now that Caitlin Clark only got like 6 weeks of off season, but I've always enjoyed it. At the very least, it's live basketball when no other live basketball is on. But I always thought that they deserved a little bit better, especially when they're making 5 figures and having to fly commercial for so long and having to do things like playing really like messed up countries like Russia just to make ends meet for the rest of the year, like Brittany Griner had to do. And so many other great superstars spend their off seasons playing in Europe because they make 5 figures in the WNBA. That tide is starting to change a little bit with Caitlin Clark coming in. Do you guys really think that the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority would be giving out $100,000 to each and every one of its active players if they didn't see the writing on the wall that there's a ton of money coming with Caitlin Clark walking in the league with it? Like, that is sort of the seismic change that just so happened to start when Caitlin Clark entered the league. And I absolutely get. And let's go to this little uncomfortable place here. And I'm going to make everybody uncomfortable on this one. So like, if people think that I'm siding with them politically on this, just wait. You'll disagree with me in a bit. So there is absolutely a little bit of the racism in the way that Clark was sort of lionized. And we know that because we sort of saw it on our board. When Iowa lost to LSU, those comments were some of the nastiest, awful, like not even basketball related. It was an open invitation for people to say the worst racist stuff that I've read in years, right? So we can't sort of say that there's no racism involved in anybody's enjoyment of Caitlin Clark. Like, that is an impossible thing to say that it doesn't exist. However, when I hear people bringing up Caitlin Clark's skin color or sexual orientation in relation to her and the league, it's always the people who don't like it. It's always the people who wish she was somebody else, that she looked different. And when we are centering somebody's identity and engaging in identity politics before we're even talking about the sport itself, that is an absolute disservice. And it is a smear that really does not, to me, does not belong in sports journalism. I'm so tired of it. It is demeaning. It is, I mean, at some point, talk about the sport. The basketball has to come first, doesn't it? I'm not a stick to sports guy, but I am a sports first guy. And so much of this gatekeeping, snide comments, Sarah Spain was, I think, the first one that I saw actually called it out on Twitter, and it was a few days ago at this point. And I, sort of kept my mouth shut because, quite frankly, quite honestly, I know a few of those gatekeepers and I want them to keep the gate open for me, right? I'm not saying anybody's name because honestly, there's too many to mention, and it's not fair to put on anybody's one shoulder. It's a cultural thing that really does need to change, because when you get so used to being the underdog, when you get so used to being the one that's getting beat up, and so used to the sport that doesn't have the resources, and you get so used to carrying the banner for more, you can't turn around and turn your nose up at the person who's helping bring that to you just because of what her skin color is, just because she's not, part of a certain community, because she's basketball first and not political first. I've only heard Caitlin Clark talk about politics once, and that was to talk about Title IX. She's very fervently pro Title IX because that is what helped get her to this point, to help make basketball viable for her to make her dream her career. And now that she has this opportunity, and now that in this NIL era, these companies can help, lift up her, social standing, lift up her image. And we have seen her, bring up the rest of the league, as a bunch of these gatekeepers told us she wouldn't. Again, completely baselessly. Now that they have what they want, be happy. Take the win for what it is. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, especially when you can't really say out loud what perfect is without engaging in some ugly, ugly, ugly identity politics. I don't think identity politics have a place in the WNBA, any other sport, any other level. And I would love it if people talked about Caitlin Clark, the basketball player, before they talk about Caitlin Clark, the white person. Andrea.
I'm on board, baby. Yeah. Didn't think we were going to go there on today's pod. Here we are.
I didn't either. I
cool
did not either.
Right on there, right on board with you. To reiterate something that I said briefly, I think it's narcissism. I had an interaction with somebody on Twitter, and then we'll move on from this point. I had an interaction with somebody on Twitter during March Madness, or it might have been when Caitlin broke the scoring record. Somebody said, "Aren't you embarrassed that you weren't paying attention to women's basketball before? And aren't you upset that people weren't paying attention to sports, but the women's basketball before?" And my reaction was, all the stuff that happened this weekend is amazing, but it should have happened sooner, and now I'm upset about it. And that's just a hell of a reaction to have. Can we just have some gratitude?
Seriously.
I think that's what it comes down to. And I personally am grateful for all the experiences that Caitlin Clark has given us and given the sport of women's basketball. And I think we can leave it at that and talk a little bit more sports as we go. But I know we talked about Christie Sides there briefly. Do we think she makes it to the end of the WNBA season with the Fever?
I would say no.
Adam held back a laugh hardcore at that question. Sorry, go ahead.
I am pessimistic at best on that because there's so much national attention that is being invested in the Fever, and it's a little bit unfair to Coach Sides. I'll say that because I don't think that they sort of are in position to turn this thing around just by bringing Caitlin Clark into that locker room. Guys, last I checked, basketball is a team sport, and it depends on a whole lot more than one player. And yeah, was Michael Jordan the most important player on those 90s Bulls? Of course he was. Was he the only important player? Of course he was not, right? One player is almost never the difference between a last place team and a national champion team, especially in a league that is as stacked to the gills as a 12-team NBA, or WNBA. That league should be 20 teams at minimum. So, I mean, that was an uphill battle to begin with, but now that ESPN has invested in the league and is investing prime airtime into the Fever, they are going to want to see some evidence of real improvement real quick. And if Sides is not that genius that, a Lisa Bluter or Jan Jensen is, people are going to start tapping their watches a lot quicker than I think she expected when she took this job. And sorry, tough stuff, but that is sort of the expectation of greatness and the standard that comes along with having this sort of once in a lifetime player on your roster. Ross, do you think that there's going to be enough of an appetite for 35 more games of this?
I don't. I mean, I don't know what the prevalence is of coaches getting fired midseason in the WNBA. It's obviously very common in other, men's pro sports, but I think you nailed it with, regardless of whether it's a common, thing within the WNBA or not. In this case, I think the circumstances really play a big factor, and the fact that that team is going to be under a national spotlight all season long. There's so many games being televised, and there's so much attention and so much focus that, if this was a different situation where they were able to fly under the radar a little bit more, maybe she survives and, she takes her lumps, and I don't know if she makes it to next season based on the way things are going, but I don't think there's that push to end things sooner rather than later. Whereas, I just think the more these losses mount up and the struggles continue, I just don't see that really being tenable for the full season.
Yeah, and the thing of it is, to me, look at the boy WNBA. Wemby down there in San Antonio, walked into a pretty rough Spurs team, and this season wasn't a whole lot better for them. But at the very least down there, Coach Popovich has as much goodwill built up as anybody in the league. And you look at Sides, this is her second year coaching. You know, she does not have the career to fall back on. She doesn't, certainly not the rings. But you know, she doesn't have that history of turning these teams around, knowing what to do with great players. Um, you know, she's just a coach, and she. I like to say that you can be good and still be replaceable. She needs to work on the good part first before we even start questioning the replaceable part. She's a very, very replaceable coach at this point. And it's going to be fascinating to see how aggressive the Fever front office is in turning that situation around and, you know, sort of finding somebody who at the very least has a vision for what success with this team, this lineup looks like. Maybe that also includes a ton of, you know, roster and personnel changes. Because as we said before, Eliot Boston is having a rough start to her year. And you just look up and down the lineup, and it's not a team that is really complete by any stretch of the imagination. Their defense, again, basketball is a team sport, and that whole team is just not there defensively. Caitlin Clark, I don't think is a net. I don't think she's a liability on defense, but she's also not somebody that you bring in to be a difference maker on day one. And sure enough, she has not been a difference maker on day one, but that is a little bit too much to put on her. They got a lot of things to figure out there. A lot of things to figure out.
I mean, there's a reason they had back-to-back #1 picks.
Yeah. And that's not all on Christie Sides, but
right.
She has to understand that like it's a win now situation, and there's a little bit of a cliche that you know, coaches like to say, I got 10, you know, guys or gals who will take your spot in a minute. There's absolutely 10 coaches who will take that Indiana job in a second and who probably have better qualifications than Sides does at this point. So yeah, I'm going to be fascinated to see how this turns out. If she makes it to the end of the season, I think it would honestly, and I don't want to sort of speak this into existence, but I think it would have to take a Caitlin Clark injury, a significant one, or something similar to what happened to Ionescu at the start of her rookie season with the Liberty. Because if Caitlin plays 40 or anything close to it and the Fever are in the cellar again, I don't see how she even makes it to the end of the season, much less the start of the next one. Eliot, is that, I mean, I assume you're on board with that?
Yeah, I mean, what it comes down to me is well, what you guys said, the sheer amount of people whose eyes are on this, but also the sheer amount of money to be made. Like, what runs the world? It's money, and there's a lot of it to be made with Caitlin Clark on the floor, and there's a lot more to be made if they're winning games. And Christie Sides has shown that she isn't exactly apt when it comes to winning basketball games. So bring Bluter out of retirement. Just kidding. I mean, I don't know any potential other names that you go out and hire, but there's better options. This isn't even like MJ at the beginning of his career with I can't think of who was coaching. Yes, exactly. And then the transition to Phil Jackson. It's like not even that. Like at least you could get a few years out of that, win some games, make the playoffs, and then ascend to the next level. But it's not even that, right? It's not even that. So you've got to find somebody who can lead this team and who can make, you know, decisions that need to be made when they need to be made and get a little fiery when you need to too.
All I'll say is this: Terry Morin's right over in Bloomington at Indiana. She's only 55 and she's been phenomenal for the Hoosiers. Make the call. Make her say no. You know, like if she wants to coach college instead, all right, great. But throw 6 figures at her, high 6 figures. Say, what are you making? We'll double it. See what happens. Because that in and of itself is a major step up for the Fever if, you know, all parties involved want that. But it really does seem like if that Fever job opens up, there will be no shortage. Even some, I think there would be a lot of surprise names and that have interest in that too. A lot of surprise names. there'd be no shortage of improvements available for that franchise if they open that job up.
Breaking news for those of us who are listening here on Thursday evening. Cale Vanderbush has a new home. He is headed to Indiana State. So he may be playing. He's from the state of Indiana. I'm going to see UNI's football schedule because they're in the same conference, the Missouri Valley Football Conference. I'm going to see if they're playing each other potentially in the Dome this season. I'm going to say yes, and they are. They're playing each other in the Dome November 23rd. So if you've got some time on November 23rd, wherever Iowa's playing that weekend, I don't know if they are.
Is that that's Black Friday weekend with
Is it?
Nebraska, right? Wouldn't that be
That's
prime?
what I was going to say.
Yeah,
Maybe folks can
think
make
so.
the trip up to Cedar Falls after the Iowa game. So the
There you
23rd, nope, that is Iowa is at Maryland that day. So
Yeah,
I have a
they're
feeling folks won't be going to both of those games.
that's a hard doubleheader.
Right.
Worth it.
So Cedar Falls, Iowa fans might be able to just see Cale get some time and maybe grab a catch there in Indiana State or for Indiana State this season. Now
Isn't Indiana State where um, Daphne ended up and then made it to the NFL? It was Dominic Daphne, right, Ross? Dafney. He was a like tight end at Iowa, walk-on tight end, goes to FCS, shifts to like running back / receiver, and made it to the NFL. Like he was an all conference, super productive, and at the very least had a cup of coffee with the Packers. So I mean, it is a path to success. Do you got something, Ross?
You're right. He started at Iowa Western out of Valley High School in Des Moines. Then he went to Iowa, and then he did go to Indiana State. Was a tight end, and then he bounced around the NFL for several years. And I think he played multiple positions, kind of a jack of all trades. But kudos to Adam's long-term memory for. We're really getting into the remember some guys portion of the podcast right now.
Thanks
It
for
is
popping up
that
for the
time of
first
year.
time in 2 weeks. Long-term memory.
It is that time of year here on HawkCast and in the sports schedule as it is. And speaking of where we're at in the sports schedule, NBA draft potentially something that Iowa fans will be watching coming here shortly next month, June. It's in June. I know it's in June. I don't know.
Yeah, the draft is the end of June.
The end of June. Okay. Potentially, maybe, I don't know. I know we had this conversation during our last pod about the possibility of Payton Sandfort going to the draft and probably his NBA combine hurting the likelihood of that happening. I will reiterate the caveat that he is having individual workouts with teams, right? Like that's not off the table. He can still impress them there, but the numbers across the board were not good for him at the draft, whether it was the physical stuff or just playing in the 5-on-5. He struggled. Now, I thought about this today, and I don't know that we addressed it last week, so I want to address it here. We're talking about the additions Iowa made in the portal. They brought in Thelwell. They brought in Trey Orr. Of course, they've got Chris Tajo and Cooper Koch coming in the 24 class. Of course, you got Josh Dix and Owen Freeman coming back, as well as Pryce Sandfort in there, Laji Dembele, of course, right? So, to me, if you bring Sandfort back, that takes so much pressure off guys like Sadu, off guys like Chris Tajo and Cooper Koch, off Josh Dix, off Owen Freeman. This is a guy that probably should compete for a first team all Big Ten spot. I was bringing back a lot of production in Freeman and Dix. If Sandfort decides to come back, him too. Brock Harding, Laji, Pryce, like they got that year under their belt. Sadu got that year under his belt at Manhattan after playing a year of prep ball too. And Thelwell, of course, probably the most experienced guy when it comes to just playing college basketball across the board. Won a ton of games at Moorhead and is probably going to be your starter at point guard. Bring some size to that backcourt. No, he's not going to be the athlete that Tony Perkins was, but overall, and adding Tajo, Traore, and having Logi come back, and I mean Owen Freeman to a degree, you got way more athletes on this team than you did last year. Josh Dix is your best defender on the perimeter, especially. Sadew's going to help you out there. Chris Tajo is going to have to learn the speed of the game, of course, but I think bringing him in, he has the potential to be a pretty good defender too. This is a scenario where I think Iowa is sneaky in the Big Ten, even in the 18-team Big Ten. They'll probably get picked 10th. This is if Payton Sandfort comes back. But if he does come back, you got an opportunity to potentially be a top 5 team in the Big Ten, win some games, get back to the NCAA tournament, give Fran his chance to get to the Sweet 16, right? Like, this team has, with Sandfort back, you've got one of the best shooters in the country, along with Josh Dix, who's just really good. Like, all across the board, Josh Dix is good, and he's a bucket from mid-range. Price takes a step forward. Logi takes a step forward. Owen takes a step forward. Brock Harding plays well in relief of Drew Thelwell, who's a proven winner and is going to contribute big time this year. Chris Tajo and Seydou Traore are lob threats. They help defensively. It's just a lot of pieces that complement each other well. And when you can get out and run and you have athletes that can compensate maybe for some deficiencies defensively, that adds up to being probably a pretty good team. You take Payton Sandfort out of that equation, and I'm not as positive as I am when talking about it with him in it.
I think the biggest beneficiary, especially when we're talking about taking pressure off of guys, the biggest beneficiary to getting Payton Sandfort back in the rotation, one is Fran McCaffrey, but two is Cooper Koch, because that Koch looks like a day one contributor and a guy that if you have the luxury of bringing him off the bench and working his way into, a bigger and bigger role over the course of the year, but still making sure that he's put in positions to succeed. I'm not going to sit here and say that he's, a guaranteed top 5 pick in the NBA draft or anything, but it does sort of seem like the same sort of situation that they had the luxury of putting Keegan Murray in when he was a freshman. So, yeah, absolutely. Having a guy like Sandfort with his leadership and his production, obviously, too, and another year of improvement for him. Like, he has gotten this feedback from the NBA about what they are looking for, about where those gaps in his game are from their perspective, as well as Fran's. That is a roadmap for him to continue to improve. And you can bring this difference maker like Koch off the bench for what? 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes a game, but he's talented enough that when you do bring him in these moments, he can still provide those like matchup problems for defenses. He is not the like, oh, good, the freshman's in the game. It's, oh no, the freshman's in the game. So between that and all these, like you mentioned, young, improving, plug and play difference makers, absolutely, Iowa's future looks pretty strong. And we are talking about a Fran McCaffrey coach team, and they've been 500 or better, I believe, in the Big Ten. What is it? 12 out of the last 13 years or something insane like that. Like, the track record is absolutely there. And he has done that with some, let's just say, emptier rosters than what he's looking at for this one, including last year's.
The thing that I think of when you mention Koch, and I'll go to you here, Ross, sorry about that, is if there's anybody to fill that Payton Sandfort role that he played the last 2-3 seasons, that mold is probably filled by Koch, right? Yeah. He's a bigger guy who can shoot the lights out. He's a 3-level scorer. I'd say he's more skilled in the post than Payton was coming out of high school, because that's the role he played for Metamora and Notre Dame and Peoria. And I mean, Cooper is going to be a knockdown shooter. Do I think he's going to play a ton of minutes? I don't. I think he needs to get stronger first. Yeah. But to have Payton around, that's a guy you can learn from. That's a guy that is and was the leader of the team last year, and you can have him back and be your leader again this year. And that'll make things easier for a guy like Brock Harding to take the reins and be the leader after that, because Brock stepped up this last season. I wrote an article about that at iowa.rivals.com, being a leader because he was a point guard as a freshman. But to be able to hand those reins off to a junior as opposed to a sophomore, and Josh Dix is just a little bit more of a quiet guy. He's probably not going to be your rah-rah leader. He might lead by example. Owen Freeman might lead by example, but those guys don't necessarily, they aren't the straw that stirs the drink like Payton Sandfort is, and that Brock Harding will be. And if you hand those reins to Brock Harding as a junior, I think that makes things a lot smoother. And I think also what I wrote about premium article and that you can check out at iowa.rivals.com in talking about Payton being better served if he returns is he knows what he's getting into next year with the NBA Combine. Like, you have to think he was nervous as all hell going to that thing, and I would be too. I mean, he was playing 5-on-5 in front of LeBron freaking James. Like, now he knows what he's getting into. Now he doesn't have to worry about playing in front of LeBron, but you know what that's like being a previous athlete. You come in as a freshman in high school and you're whatever, you're doing whatever, you're playing whatever sport. For me, it was track. And it was, oh no, this is so different. And then you come back as a sophomore and you know what's happening, right? It's a different level of confidence. And I think having that background of going through the process for Payton will be very beneficial for him next season, assuming if he does come back this year to Iowa and then re-enter the process next year, maybe work himself up to being a first-round draft pick. Go ahead, Ross.
Yes. I was just going to kind of echo what you were saying before that, I think Payton really is the difference between this being a potentially, Iowa team with a ton of upside versus a team that, is going to struggle next year, or at least take some real lumps as they try to figure things out. Because, I mean, he's a guy that would play, probably around 30 minutes a game, score 16 to 19 points a game, 6-7 rebounds a game. He's going to give you that leadership. He's going to be the guy drawing the defensive attention, which makes things easier for the other guys. So, like, taking that away, from that team, and then everybody else has to do a little bit more. And, everybody else has to be put in a situation where maybe they're not quite comfortable yet. Like you mentioned, a lot of those new guys like Traore and Tadjo and Koch, they're going to have to do a little bit more than they would if Payton's not back. And Harding has to play more. Freeman, there's more pressure on him to produce, and Lodgy, and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I think, with him back, I see that being a team that can, definitely finish in the top half of the Big Ten, push for a bye in the Big Ten tournament, push for NCAA tournament. That can be a really solid team. Without him, that looks like a team that, I think will probably still be pretty fun to watch because, you mentioned this team is going to have a ton more athletes than it's had the last couple of years, which I think will be exciting. But they're going to take some lumps too, because they're going to have a lot of youth, a lot of inexperience, a lot of just things they need to get better at, that they're going to have to do a lot of on-the-job training, on the court training, I guess, as it were. And that's just going to lead to some rough moments.
Yeah, and what's really going to be the difference for this team if Payton Sandfort isn't back is brace yourselves, the defense. Because you look at what is coming back to that team that doesn't, without Payton Sandfort, that doesn't look like a great half-court team. It looks like a tremendous transition team. Like I would not want to run with those dudes, whether or not Sandfort's there. But when the opposing defense has a chance to get set, has a chance to clog the middle, take away those lobs and interior passes, and to just sort of double down on that, who is it on that roster that's really going to punish those opposing defenses for sagging and clogging? Like, who is it that's spacing this thing out? And like, yeah, Josh Dix is going to help, but like Cooper Koch, like, are you really going to want him on the court for 30 plus minutes a game? Because, yeah, Eliot's shaking his head. I agree. Because again, he's a guy that needs to get stronger, especially if you're playing in the Big Ten, where there's big boys every night. And it's a little bit like playing, Big Ten football. You get big boys on that line every week. So Sandfort is sort of the key to fleshing out this team and giving them a variety of ways that they can hurt opponents. But yeah, I mean, other than that, Ross, I absolutely agree that they are going to be exciting. They are going to be more athletic. They're going to have elements that they did not have this past season, but I think they're still fundamentally really, really flawed without Sandfort in that lineup too.
So now let's transition here to I thought about hitting recruiting. There's really, if you want to get all in on recruiting, you can check out iowawithout.rivals.com. If you're not a premium subscriber yet, join us today, iowawithout.rivals.com/subscribe. We'd love to have you. Not really a ton to hit on. That's not premium stuff at the moment. I think we've gone long enough. We can probably hit wrestling. I will say official visits coming up. Another one just got scheduled. Terrence Smith Jr. out of West Aurora, Illinois, 3-star high school there would be a really good get for Iowa. There are a couple receivers who are planning officials, and Iowa's gonna need to land them really bad. And that's same situation as Jacob Gill. You bring these guys in, you hope they make some plays, and you hope that results in you being able to get better players going forward. So that's just kind of the situation at hand. Is there anything that you guys would like to hit on recruiting wise, or have any questions for me in terms of basketball, football, 2025, 2026, 2027, anything at all across the board? Rivals camp series, camps coming up, anything?
Who really, and let's not give away the premium stuff for free here, but who really jumped out at you at the camp series?
The number one, let me, well, there were probably, I don't know, like 10 guys that were Iowa recruits that were there. And as far as names that folks will know, to me, it's Parker Sutherland from City High.
Mhm.
This is a kid who somehow doesn't have a single D1 offer yet. He is 6'7", 221 pounds in City High, plays for Mitch Moore, who is one of the better coaches in the state of Iowa. Is going to catch passes from Bobby Bacon this year, who is probably the most underrated quarterback in the state right now. Has one D1 offer from St. Thomas. He should have more. I don't know if it's just about putting more on the field for Parker. He only had 18 catches last year, 4 touchdowns. I'm imagining, well, he's going to be Bobby's top weapon this year, and I can tell you that. And even if he's not a tight end for you, if you think that you can mold him into a left tackle and put a bunch of weight on him, you can probably do that too. I mean, look at Spencer Brown, who went to UNI as a tight end prospect, 8-man football, and then they flip him to left tackle right tackle. Now he plays right tackle for the Buffalo Bills. Like, that's just a possibility for him. I think he should at least have UNI, South Dakota State, North Dakota State, like all the Missouri Valley Conference schools should be all over this kid with an offer. If not, then we'll see what happens. But a couple names I'll be watching come camp season, or I'll be going to Iowa State in June, as Iowa doesn't allow media to go to the camps. But Mason Beaver, Isaac Beaver, and then Hayden Bishop, all 2026 guys, all part of Strength U in North Liberty with JC Moreau, who does incredible work with linemen and such. The Beaver twins play for Dowling Catholic, and Hayden Bishop plays for Cedar Falls. All those guys were at the Rivals Camp Series as well. Hayden, much stronger than I thought he was going to be. A lot better than I thought he was going to be, to tell you the truth. Beaver twins, those are some maniacal defensive linemen, I'll tell you that. Very raw, but lots of energy and really strong. Both of them clean, plus 300 pounds, power clean plus 300 plus pounds. So, yeah, those are some names that stuck out to me as far as folks would probably recognize here on the pod. Other than that, Keenan Harris is the big one, the big fish at camp, at Rivals Camp Series, that I was after. 2026 linebacker, already has offers from Oregon and USC. So Iowa going to be pushing for him, but you can read more about him on iowa.rivals.com. Now to Ross once again, wrestling. Did you have a question?
I'm gonna say offers from our new conference friends, Oregon and USC.
Right, exactly. Do you guys have anything else recruiting wise before I go to you here, Ross? Wrestling? No? Okay. So yeah, let's head over here, Ross. What do you think about the newest developments in wrestling in terms of Nelson Brands coming back for another season, and then the addition from Arizona State?
Yeah, they got Kyle Parko. Good job. He transferred, grad transfer from, I guess it's a grad, whatever. He's out of the transfer portal from Arizona State, Kyle Parko. But yeah, the first big news was Nelson Brands, the longtime member of the team. He is the son of assistant coach Terry Brands and the nephew of head coach Tom Brands. He's been there for, I think this will be his 7th season. He got this extra year for a medical hardship waiver. He got hurt a couple years ago, ended the season. So the NCAA, in one of their rare acts of kindness and generosity, is giving him another year of eligibility, which is nice, especially nice in this case because he was forced to miss all of last season due to a suspension as a result of that. Let's just go with controversial for now, gambling investigation by the state of Iowa that he and several other Iowa and Iowa State athletes got caught up in. And so, yeah, he was part of that. He would have been a senior last year, would have been his last season. But again, was suspended, could not compete. But he got another year, so he'll be back in 2024, 2025. The interesting thing is that I don't know exactly where he fits in the lineup because Iowa essentially has 4 options that could be really good for 2 spots, and how that's going to work out. I still have a lot, many months before it becomes an issue. So lots of time to try and sort things out. But he has wrestled at multiple different weights at Iowa, but he's had his most success at 174 pounds. He was an All-American there 2 years ago. But Iowa has Patrick Kennedy, who wrestled there this past season and did pretty well. He went like 20-7, something like that. Just missed out on being an All-American himself last year. They also have Gabe Arnold, who was a big-time blue-chip recruit, arrived last year, competed in a handful of matches as a true freshman. They changed the rules so they can compete in up to 5 dates and still keep a red shirt, kind of like the football rule with red shirting. And he looks really good, and 174 is also his best weight. So how that gets sorted out, and then on top of that, they're bringing in a guy and who'll be a true freshman this coming season, Angelo Ferrari. He was the #1 recruit in the country this class, actually, by some services. He is part of the also controversial Ferrari clan, whose older brother AJ won a national title at Okie State a few years ago, has since been embroiled in several legal controversies and issues, we'll say. But Angelo himself has had no issues like that. He's just a very elite recruit. He also projects in that 174 to 184 range. So again, 4 guys, 2 spots, 174, 184. How that exactly gets sorted out, very much up in the air. We'll see. My guess is I think it'll be Kennedy and Arnold kind of wrestling off to determine 174 starter. They're kind of the most natural options there to see which one does best. And at 184, probably Brands and Ferrari. Brands has done 184 before. He's got that experience. So he's slight favorite, I would say. And Ferrari, you obviously have the option of redshirting him and just, he sits out this year, essentially. But you can also see, if he's ready to hit the ground running and be a major star and a major player from the jump, that option is on the table too. And that's probably the best weight for him to do that, for at least for the full Iowa lineup and roster. And the other item, Parco, is a really nice addition. They got him out of Arizona State. He started at Fresno State before transferring to the Sun Devils. 4-time All-American. He has another year of eligibility because of the COVID year that the NCAA gave everybody who was around basically for that 2020 NCAA tournament that got canceled for COVID. Everybody got an extra year of eligibility if they wanted to use it. And so he's using it, coming to Iowa to try and get that national title that has eluded him. He's, like I said, he's been an All-American 4 times. I think his best finish was 4th 2 years ago. He was 5th this past season. So he's kind of been right around knocking on the door of some of those top guys. But he'll be a really good addition for Iowa at that 149-pound weight. They had a couple guys there last year, Caleb Bracci and Victor Voinovich, who kind of split time, did okay, but didn't really excel at that weight. So adding an All-American there, I think, is a really good addition for that team, and should, boost their overall potential to contend for trophies significantly. So definitely some exciting news. I don't think they're done in terms of adding components. 133 and 141, a couple other weights, still a little light in terms of options there. So I think they might be hitting the portal to find some guys there as well. But we'll keep an eye on that, and if something pops, we'll be writing about it on the site, iowa.rivals.com. We're going to have a kind of a preview up shortly, looking at what the lineup could look like next year after these two new additions, especially.
So I was a little bit tickled by Nelson Brands having the Gambler in his Twitter name. Like, hey, you might as well lean into it at this point. You've got your last year, and this is going to be a much better way for him to put all that past him, and as long as he's lucky injury wise.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice that he actually gets a chance to kind of get some closure on his college career on his own terms. You think about a guy like Noah Shannon in football, who is, denied that opportunity by just, absurdity. But yeah, it's great that he's not, suffering that same unfortunate fate like Noah. So
yeah. And then speaking of the controversial Ferrari clan, which wrestler was it recently? I think within the last few months, there was a clip of one of them winning some sort of meet. It might have even been winning a title at their weight. And then during the closing seconds, it gets a little bit scrappy. I think a punch is thrown, and the Ferrari kid gets disqualified and is not exactly remorseful on his way out of the ring. Which one was that? Was that AJ too?
yeah, that was AJ, the oldest. He's the one that was at Okie State. He was the former national champion. He's hasn't wrestled the last few years due to injury and the aforementioned legal issues. And yeah, he was at the Soldier Salute event which is in Coralville at the Extreme Arena. And yeah, he actually wrestled Iowa guy, Zach Glazier. And yeah, it was a very close match. And I think, Ferrari won, but then he threw a punch and he managed to get DQ'd. So Glazier won instead. And it was just all kinds of a kerfuffle. And the Ferrari clan is an interesting group that if you don't know them, just picture like Jersey Shore in wrestling singlets, basically. Like they are, they're characters for sure.
There you go. That was this episode of HawkCast. Also, before we get out of here, we've got some premium content coming for you, for you, either tonight or tomorrow morning. Spoke to a couple sources around men's basketball, talking a little bit about Owen Freeman and expectations for him going into next season, recruiting, stuff like that. So we've got that info coming on our premium board. Premium subscribers will have access to it. So this was our episode of HawkCast. We appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget, if you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe, drop a like, drop a comment. Let us know what you're thinking about all things Hawkeyes. Of course, we hit on all of it today. Let us know what you're thinking. If you are a premium subscriber, first of all, thank you for joining us. If you're not, head over and do that today, iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. All the inside information there for you on recruiting, men's basketball, football, etc. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you might be listening, but not subscribed. So make sure you do that today. Leave that rate and review. It helps us out. Of course, it makes us very happy. For now, my name is Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder and Adam Jacoby. For now, we will see you next time.